News when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. President Trump's so-called anti-weaponization fund has been put on hold by the courts, but the audit immunity that goes with it appears to be moving forward. Sources tell Bloomberg officials are continuing with the agreement, which prevents the government from probing President Trump's past tax filings, including those of his businesses. And the White House says the president has signed an executive order that directs U.S. federal agencies to work with artificial intelligence companies to protect networks from AI-enabled cyber attacks. It would establish a cybersecurity clearinghouse to coordinate and deconflict software vulnerabilities. The order stops short of requiring mandatory tests. And President Trump has just filled a big hole in his cabinet, naming Bill Pulte acting director of national intelligence. The president announced it on social media, saying he'll remain in his current post as head of the Federal Housing Finance Agency and chair of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall has details from Washington.
Pulte is, of course, a very staunch ally of this White House. We have become very familiar with him because he has led some of the administration's staunchest criticism when it comes to the Federal Reserve, and also led that probe that we are still waiting to see resolved when it comes to alleged allegations of mortgage fraud by Fed Governor Lisa Cook.
Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall reports Pulte lacks military and intelligence community experience as housing chief. He succeeds Tulsi Gabbard, who announced she's stepping down at the end of this month. Job openings jumped in April to the highest level in almost 2 years. Job openings surging unexpectedly to 7.62 million. Economists surveyed by Bloomberg were expecting about 6.9 million. Stuart Paul is a U.S. economist with Bloomberg Economics.
We're supposed to be seeing a lot of crowding out of jobs from AI. We're supposed to see a lot of the professional and business services jobs AI'd away. Instead, we're seeing some additional labor demand, I guess, as firms reassess how much labor they actually need as they start incorporating AI tools into their business.
Stuart Paul with Bloomberg Economics notes the so-called quits rate of workers leaving their jobs voluntarily fell to 1.9%. That's the lowest since 2020. Cleveland Fed President Beth Hammack says holding rates steady makes sense for now.
For today, it's reasonable to keep rates steady given the uncertainties around the economic outlook. But if recent trends continue, it may soon be appropriate to act.
Hammack says she's more concerned about inflation, which has been above the Fed's 2% target. She made those remarks at an event in Cleveland. We do check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 is up 0.2%. NASDAQ up 0.2%. The Dow up 0.3%. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.44% and the 2-year yield at 4.03%. WTI crude oil now right at $92 a barrel, and Brent crude hovering just around $95 a barrel. Google parent Alphabet is raising $80 billion through a package of equity offerings, including an investment deal with Berkshire Hathaway. Alphabet shares are more than 2% lower. Hewlett-Packard Enterprise shares soared as much as 37%. That's the biggest jump on record after the company reported second quarter results beating expectations and raised its full-year forecast on key measures. HPE shares now about 22% higher. SpaceX is negotiating to pay much smaller fees to Wall Street firms handling its IPO. It's looking to pay less than 0.75% for the $75 billion it aims to drum up in an IPO this month. Investment banks typically charge 4 to 7% on IPOs, which raise less than $1 billion on average. Still, the banks, led by Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, are likely to rake in about $500 million. President Trump says he thinks the U.S. can reach an interim peace deal with Iran soon, with discussions continuing at what he calls a rapid pace. Iran has insisted on a ceasefire in Lebanon being part of the Memorandum of Understanding with the U.S. and is discussing its final text to send to the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio tells a Senate Foreign Relations panel Iran has already mined large parts of the Strait of Hormuz.
They're firing on commercial ships, and they've mined large segments of Hormuz, international waters. And so the blockade is only against Iranian ships. And it's very simple. The notion is if no one's ships are going to get out, then Iran's ships aren't going to get out either.
He says the U.S. will not give Iran sanctions relief in exchange for reopening the strait. Rubio says it can take up to 6 days to get a response from Iran, and he says the Iranian regime is fractured, having its own communications issues. Former NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says since he left that job 2 years ago, tensions among NATO allies are getting worse.
The tensions between Europe and North America and the United States are even stronger and more difficult to manage.
Stoltenberg Stoltenberg says it's unacceptable for the U.S. to threaten Denmark. That's a reference to President Trump's ambition to take Greenland. Jens Stoltenberg spoke at a Bloomberg Newsmakers event in Oslo. Catch that full conversation on the Bloomberg Talks podcast. It's primary election day in 6 states. California voters have more than 6 candidates to choose from for governor. In Los Angeles, Mayor Karen Bass faces more than a dozen challengers. In New Jersey, 4 Democrats are competing to take on Republican Congressman Tom Keene Jr. in November. He's been absent for months, dealing with an unspecified medical issue. And Iowa Democrats are starting to feel hopeful about their chances in the upcoming elections. The state's heavily agricultural economy has been affected by President Trump's tariff agenda, the Iran war, and sweeping policy changes. That's news when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.